You know, everybody has a favorite story that they like to hear or to tell, and right now I'd like to share my favorite story with you. This is the story of the buffalo hunter. You know, anytime a bunch of mountain men get together, something's always cooking. Now, I don't mean trouble. What I mean is real cooking, like in fixing something to eat. You see, when we're out tending our trap lines, we never know when there might be hostile Indians around, so we have to be real careful about building a fire. But when we all get together, either for a winter camp or a summer rendezvous, somebody's always got a pot of something cooking on the fire, or somebody's got a rack of buffalo ribs a-roasting. Why, then we all get together and share a meal and swap a few stories. Now, in my camp, I usually have a big old pot of buffalo stew a-cooking on the fire. And them trappers know that they're always welcome to stop by and share a bowl. But you know, every year it's just the same. Them trappers always want to know, is there real buffalo in that pot? It's like they don't trust me. So then I tell them, of course there's real buffalo in that pot. That's why I call it buffalo stew. Then I tell them that if there wasn't buffalo in it, I'd have called it what it was. I said it might have been venison stew or panther stew, possum stew or rabbit stew, or, well, maybe even skunk stew. But most of the time there really was buffalo in that pot, so that's why I called it buffalo stew. I kind of thought that made sense. But folks, I want to tell you about the time we almost didn't have any stew at all. It was back a few years ago, and while we was in the third year of a real bad dry spell. Why, that summer it was so dry that the catfish was 6 months old before they learned how to swim. It was so dry that one day I caught a catfish. The darn thing had fleas. It was so dry that the buzzards had to fly backwards to keep from choking on the dust. And it was hot, too. Why, one day I saw a coyote chasing a jackrabbit, and it was so hot that both of them was walking. It was so hot that you had to use a potholder to pet the dog. It was so hot that the birds couldn't sit on their nests. They had to lay their eggs standing up. So do you get the idea that it was hot and dry? Well, it was. And it stayed so hot and dry that summer that all of the buffalo and all of the deer and, well, most of the other critters for that matter, well, they just up and disappeared. I figured that they must have gone way up north or way up in the high country to escape the heat. And when it got time for us to be getting together for the winter camp, they hadn't come back down yet, and we was having trouble making meat. Why, we hadn't seen a sign of a buffalo or a deer, or, well, any other critters for that matter, for quite a spell. And I don't mind telling you, we was getting kind of worried. You see, we didn't have any winter stores laid in yet, and it was looking like it was going to be a long winter filled with starving times. Why, I hunted for 3 weeks, and the only game I saw was a pair of Canada geese that was swimming around on what was left of the river. And they only stayed around 'cause she was a cripple. She was missing the tip off of one wing, and I figured that it must have got bit off by a fox or a coyote when they stopped there early that spring. But anyway, that old gander, he stayed right with her, 'cause you know them geese, they stay mates for life. Now, folks, I'm a patient man and a good shot, so I kept on a-hunting and a-looking, but I wasn't having much luck. I kind of figured that if the buffalo didn't show up pretty quick, well, then I'd get that goose for my stew, 'cause I knew she wouldn't survive the winter anyways. So I just kind of kept an eye on that pair of geese, watching them swim back and forth out there in the river. Well, sir, one day I was down by the river, and I was cutting me some willows with my broad axe. I was kind of keeping an eye on them geese, watching them swim around out there like they was, and I happened to look up on the bank across the river, and there sat a fox. And that old fox, he was a-watching them geese, too. So I got to thinking, you know, I'd better get that goose right now, or I might not get another chance. So I stuck my broadaxe in a stump right there by the edge of the river, and I grabbed my rifle. Now, I figured I was only going to get one shot, so I only had one bullet and one charge of powder. Now, folks, I'm a patient man, and a good shot. And I knew that if I was going to get that goose, I needed to find just the right angle for the shot, and I knew just the place. So I headed upstream a ways, crossed over the river, and I came back down the other side. 'Cause I knew where there was a couple of great big boulders that was right by the edge of the water, and I could get down in behind them rocks and have a perfect angle for the shot. So I worked my way down into position, raised up my rifle, marked the sight, pulled the hammer back, and started taking aim. I drew in a breath, let out half of it, and I was sighting right down that barrel. But I didn't shoot, 'cause I'm a patient man and a good shot. You know, I got to watching them geese a-swimming around out there like they was, and I figured that if I lined the shot up just right, when they passed by one another and, well, their heads got all lined up with me, I might just be able to get both of them with one shot. So I just waited. And while I was a-waiting there, I got me the biggest surprise of my life. Why, a great big old bull buffalo and one cow stepped out of the brush, right back down there by where I'd been cutting willows. They was coming to get a drink. I decided right then I wanted buffalo. But folks, I'm a patient man and a good shot, and I could see that there was a branch hanging out over the water, and it was going to interfere with my shot. So I could tell that I'd have to move out into the river just a bit in order to improve my aim. So I started easing my way out into the water, kind of feeling my way along with my feet. When I finally got set, there was a big old flat rock down under my left foot, and there was a big old round rock down under my right foot. I got myself into position, raised up my rifle, marked the sight, pulled back the hammer, and started taking aim. I drew in a breath, let out half of it, and was taking real careful aim. But just as I started squeezing the trigger, that rock under my right foot moved. Well, that startled me a bit. You see, it wasn't a rock at all. It was a big old snapping turtle, and all I could picture was him taking a bite out of my big toe. So I tried to change position and kind of shift my weight, but when I did, I splashed the water just a bit. Well, that old bull heard it, and he picked up his head. And I knew he'd be gone in just a second, so I had to shoot even though I was off balance. Well, I took a real quick aim and I squeezed the trigger. Kaboom! Well, right then a 5-pound bass jumped out of the water right in front of me. Bullet hit him square in the head, in one eye and out the other, but that bullet kept right on a-going. Now, when I spotted them buffalo, I forgot all about them geese, but just at that moment they was crossing out there in front of me, and their heads was all lined up with me. Well, sir, that bullet killed both of them just slickered in a whistle, and it never slowed down. But it was deflected a bit, and that old bullet skipped off the river and hit the blade of that broadaxe that was sticking in the stump. Cut that bullet clean in half. Well, sir, one half flew up and hit that bull right between the eyes, and the other half peeled off and it caught that cow just behind the ear. Dropped both of them before they could take a step. Well, now, in all the excitement, I was off balance anyways, and just as I squeezed the trigger, that old snapper took off, sent me flying into the river, and there I was just a-thrashing and a-flailing around. When I finally got up, I had a beaver in one hand and a muskrat in the other. My pants was so full of fish that it popped this here button right off the top of my trousers. Well, that button flew 40 yards up on the bank and killed a partridge that was sitting in a tree. Okay, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it was just a lucky shot, right? Well, now, that is what you was thinking, wasn't it? Well, maybe you're right. 'Cause you see, when I finally got down there and I rolled that old bull buffalo over, you know, when he fell down, he landed on a fox. The fox had a rabbit in its mouth. The rabbit was chewing on a wild turnip. Now, I don't mind telling you, I was just as happy as a flea on a Tennessee hound dog, 'cause I could make me all the stew I wanted, and there was still plenty of meat left for the winter stores. All I had to do was to collect it. But that's another story. And folks, that is my favorite story. That's the story of the buffalo hunter.